Hello and welcome to Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth, the podcast which asks, how do enterprise products grow? And which just occasionally asks, does testing have anything to do with it? We'll be talking to people working in product in some of the most exciting businesses in the world in software. We are Global App Testing. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth. We have gathered experts in enterprise product development and asked, how do enterprise products grow? And just occasionally, does testing have anything to do with it? Our guest today is Lucas Thelosen, Head of Product Data and AI Cloud at Google. His work in Google helps businesses apply data and AI to their processes to help them improve the way they apply AI to their operations. Hello, Lucas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks very much for joining us. Why Boulder rather than Silicon Valley?
My wife is actually from here, and it turns out, Boulder has a decent amount of tech startup scene itself, and a lot of the large companies have a campus here, even though it's a small town in comparison. Right, Denver is like 3.5 million, and Boulder is just 150,000 people. But you got a big university here, and Apple has a campus, Microsoft has a campus, like Google has a really big campus here. It's a good place.
So your job title is Head of Product Data and AI Cloud, right? How does your team sort of fit within the Google machine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And every time someone asks me, "Oh, you're at Google, do you know Peter?" Right? Like, it's a massive company. And my team, we're in Google Cloud, so we're in the enterprise space of like working with other companies on how we can use technologies that were mostly built, to serve other Google domains, but how we can use those technologies to serve these companies. And then I'm specifically in the data analytics space. So as you mentioned earlier, I came in through the Looker acquisition. Looker is a BI tool, a data analytics tool. And I'm in the data analytics group. And my function, if you go to like AWS, for example, it might be called Global Product Manager, which is a overarching team that brings together the suite of products and sees how those are actually applied to customer scenarios. So we work a lot with customers, we work a lot with partners, take that feedback, bring it back to our internal product management teams. And really, my specific role is to bring the data and AI offerings together. I've been in the AI space for quite a while. I built my first AI app in 2010 for a large financial institution here, and we got it into production, which, if you went live with an AI application in production in 2010, that has been a long time. So
a long road to generative AI we get today. Can you tell me a little bit, before we double click on your kind of role and the more specific stuff around data, can you tell me a little bit about, you were in Looker, it was acquired by Google, now you're a product manager at Google. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like and the kind of contrast in the styles of working that must be between the two places?
Yeah, that's a fun. We could make an entire podcast just about lessons learned from an acquisition. A couple of things. Right, Looker was an amazing company. You don't go from within a few years to a $2.6 billion acquisition if you're not an amazing company with amazing people in it. I ran my consultancy before that, and I got to work with hundreds of different companies. And you see in every company, you have a couple of these unicorn people, a few of them. Like I was downtown in San Francisco working with Uber when they tried to go global. And I would say the team of 120 people at Uber had like two of these unicorn people. And then I got to meet the early team at Looker. And the density of unicorn people was just like, it gave me the thrill, like what was it called? The goosebumps. And so I was like, okay, if I can work there, that would be an amazing place. And so I was a little worried, right? Like once we get acquired by anyone, well, how would that change? And we were certainly on a good track to IPO. But then I walked into the Google office and I got to meet some Googlers, and I really felt at home. Like I felt like I just returned home. You get that feeling when you're on a long trip and you come home. That's how I felt. Yeah.
And did you continue the work that you were doing at Looker in Google, or were you kind of subsumed by the broader Google machine straight away?
Yeah, and that's always the question, right? Like, do you try to integrate as quickly as possible or try to stay isolated? Now, our timing of acquisition was the worst it can probably be. So we joined March of 2020. I don't know if you remember March of 2020, but it was a few days before the great toilet paper shortage in the United States. At least, I don't know how it was in Europe, but so I got my badge the day before the lockdown. And it's tricky to decouple those two things a little bit because, all these regular processes that are probably in place didn't quite kick in as much. And we very much continue to operate as an independent company for quite some time. But then you do want to see how, how are there some synergies to be gained. And also from a careers perspective, right, for me personally, it's like, okay, I want to expand a bit beyond Looker. I mean, I think Looker is still an amazing product and at the core of what I do. But like I want to also take in like BigQuery and Gemini, right? The other interesting products that Google has. And so I started building relationships and so did a lot of other Lookers. It's really, really cool now to see all these legacy Lookers all across the company and all these different nooks. Yeah.
So your experience then, because obviously, so you ran the data consultancy, you were the kind of the lead consultant, and then you had a job title at Looker was what, VP Professional Services. So that's quite an unusual background for a product manager. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Has that given you maybe a different perspective to most product managers that you'd see, or what do you think about that, and how does Google think about that as your employer?
Yeah, it is a bit of an unusual background. The thing I like about people coming from the consultancy world, the professional services world, is that much like myself, we got to actually be there with the customers, see their pain points firsthand, and then try to figure out, what can we do with duct tape and glue to make things work, what kind of the hacky solutions we can put around it to bridge the limitations any given product might have. And that kind of understanding, that deep understanding of our customers really is quite beneficial to a product org, especially at Google. And here's why I'm saying especially at Google. So Google is full of super smart people that have great ideas, especially on the technology side. I don't want to be like generally speaking, but maybe sometimes it doesn't get to the customer until later, until a later stage.
Yeah.
And, so one of the things that I think, myself and then a few of my team members that also joined the product org brought is that perspective of the customer. This is what customers really need. Like, okay, you have all these super cool things, but they're like so far away from what a customer can actually use on a day-to-day basis, right? The average company is so far like removed from the capabilities you're building out here. We got to get closer to the customer's needs right now, in the year, whatever the year might be, right? Like you can't be building something or thinking of something that will be beneficial. I mean, it's good to think about what will be beneficial 10 years down the road, but you got to meet the customer where they are as well. And so I was quite passionate about that. And luckily I found, we have a leader here who have similar beliefs. And so he asked me if I could join the product org. It's unusual to make the transition. And actually for the first time in my entire career, I had to interview. Yeah. So Google made me go through the entire interview process, the PM interview process, which, is quite famous.
Yeah.
Including the technical one, which apparently the technical one is the one I absolutely aced because, I had been in the field with customers for years. So I do know the technology.
I suppose with enterprise businesses, there is an idea that you can get sort of further and further away from the customer and that you get larger and larger kind of bureaucracies of people making decisions that don't actually maybe relate to the real world. And it's a very interesting take on inoculating against that problem, if that's kind of part of the thinking there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that is interesting about the data and AI space that is different from any other space I can think about, and people in the comments, please disagree, let me know. But here's how I approach data and AI. So data and AI inside a company is usually it's a side function oftentimes. It's not someone's core business. And so what happens is data and AI is not treated as a product itself. And so my big argument for over a decade now has been, we got to treat data and AI as a product in your organization. And meaning, we have to have a roadmap and we have to build it for change, because data in essence is always used to make decisions that change the business, right? If data is successful, if the use of data in your company is done right, it should change the business. If it changes the business, the requirements for the data are going to change, right? So an example, I built a dashboard for a company, right? They have let's say, okay, back to the example with Uber, right? Okay, they want to expand globally, right? Like we have to figure some things out to go into other markets, the UK, India, right? Very different markets. And we built these dashboards, very deep insights to understand how the business functions there. And the next year, when things are actually running quite well, those dashboards are integrated now. right? Because the thing we deliver to the business in its very nature changed the business in a good way. And so you have to retire these dashboards and come up with new ways to look at the business. Right now that the business is maturing in the UK or in India, like, what do I need to know now? What do I need to understand now? And this is applicable to any kind of business. I'm not sharing proprietary information from Uber here, just in case anyone from Uber is listening. But I think that managing data and AI as a product also prepared anyone coming from that space, I think, quite well then to become a product manager. But if you managed that in your company as a product, then I think you have always been thinking about roadmaps and customer requirements and how to integrate all of that.
So that brings us to the kind of second section of this. Can you just unpack a little bit about what the kind of product is for businesses? What it is what product are you managing in terms of kind of outcomes and who uses it?
Like, as I mentioned earlier, right, it's an umbrella organization that in essence brings together the different products like Looker, like BigQuery, like Gemini, right? How can we bring them together to solve customer problems? And then a lot of what my team does is we go and meet with our leading customers and discuss, like, what does your roadmap look like? What does our roadmap look like? How do we bring your input into our roadmaps for all these different features, all these different products to really solve your problems in many ways, right? Like, if you look at most of the cloud providers, we're selling hammers and axes and nails and then we say, okay, go ahead, build some furniture. For a lot of companies, that is great, right? They have a bunch of people that think about cool ways to build furniture and all kinds of other things, and they go crazy on it, right? Like, absolutely awesome. It works really well. And then there are companies that might not have that talent, like that kind of creative genius that brings together technology and I think for those we got to bring some inspiration. Like, how could you do marketing analytics? How could you optimize your supply chain, right? And I think if we bring a bit more of the this is what we see in the industry being done, and how you can use Looker and Gemini and BigQuery together to now optimize your supply chain so you have the right goods in the right place at the right time.
So what are some areas of activity then that are particularly exciting to you in terms of, I mean, I've got operations on the sheet in front of me, but I'm also kind of interested in stuff that is relevant to product managers, because they're obviously a lot of the people listening to this. What are some areas that we've had this kind of this sea change in AI capabilities over the last couple of years. What are some areas that are beginning to open up that could help, that are areas we're expecting and seeing lots of kind of early movers to make advances in?
I have my own personal passions in this space, right? I think there are tremendous gains, and we have done this with so many companies now, where we were able to optimize the supply chain, for example, right? A lot of the supply chain is still on like sticky notes and WhatsApp messages and whatnot, which now is very accessible with Gen AI. Right now, you can actually understand, okay, wait, what was on those sticky notes? What is in these WhatsApp groups, right? How can I take these data points? And when you optimize the supply chain, the reason I get so excited about it is you're solving like one of the things that we always wanted to solve, but it's hard to do in a business setting, which is reducing our carbon footprint, reducing the waste that we have. And so I got to work with one of the largest retailers here, and we were able to save over $10 million a week in fresh produce waste. Wow. So meaning, lettuce, blueberries, like all these things that are thrown out because, on the way they expired or they got to the wrong store and people didn't have the demand there, right? And those kind of things, if you can optimize that, right, that's a tremendous amount of savings for the company, but also, it really does some good in the world.
Well, was that, and so just help me understand where, so in this particular case, so you've got a grocery supply chain, so you're applying AI to it, but is that by building a model of how it works and asking the AI to optimize for the best outcomes, or is that by, you mentioned information retrieval and ensuring that information can be kind of moved about as effectively as possible through kind of better querying and stuff? What is the actual way that you would manage to save all that waste through this technology in a company like that?
The honest answer there is a lot of it is actually quite traditional AI.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is still good old, predictive forecasting, demand sensing. I do think where generative AI can help us and is helping us already in two significant ways is, and let me take a step back to if this is the data and AI stack, right? You You have ETL, you have data warehouse, you have business insights. There are two areas where we have big gaps. One is on the data ingestion side, right? Like I was describing the sticky notes, right? Like so much of what we still do is not anywhere structured. So any kind of unstructured data, let's say, a social media trend analysis. Okay, what are people talking about right now? Like, what should we be thinking about in a certain area? Let me take a very concrete example. So we were helping this company that gets you home improvement goods. So in a given year, right, we were able to see that, let's say, the weather pattern shows us that the barbecue season is going to start a little earlier. Now, search trends show me a similar thing, and then on social media, I can see that there's more posts happening on that theme. People start thinking about barbecuing. That helps me predict that the given company here needs to get in certain areas barbecue grills into their stores earlier. So first, I have to put a deeper discount on snow blowers, all that stuff to get it off the shelves, to get it out of the store. And then I need to get the barbecue grills in pretty early. And just having a couple of weeks earlier, your barbecue grill's ready. I think, and then on the other hand, so if you have the data analytics stack, right, we just talked about data ingestion and making more data sources accessible through generative AI. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, one of the things we always have a problem with in this space is the last mile. So we have the insights, right? And there are people like me, right, who look at a screen and they see certain trends and they say, okay, we need to do this. But for the average person, like in the store, right, the driving the truck there, it's still, there's a big gap. And so I think generative AI can now bring an analyst into everybody's hands, right? Like bridge that last gap and say, here are certain trends I'm seeing, here are certain actions we can take based on that, and have the conversation so you can multiply what your data analytics team was able to do in the past, right? In the past, you only have a couple people and they tell the CEO, they tell the VP of so-and-so what to do. But now you can actually, with generative AI, get data analytics insights explained to the person out there doing a very different job.
So this podcast is all about growing enterprise products. Are there sort of, off the top of your head, I guess, I mean, this is a slightly cruel line of questioning, but are there ways that you could apply this kind of AI to, or that you would apply your work to somebody who is a product manager who is tasked with growth and is grappling with that pool of data in a business?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing me back to the topic of the conversation here. I get really excited about data analytics. Anyways, well, I have worked with a couple of product teams, and I mean, one of the challenges that I have seen is, okay, how do I put this in a politically correct way? People tend to, like, as much as they think they're data-driven, they like to go with their guts. And so a lot of product managers I've seen actually didn't apply much analytics to the decision-making. I had multiple product teams where I had to force an A/B testing methodology. And it's like, okay, you can't just test B, C, and D and not, have your control group of not changing anything at all. So let's put that in place. And I do think, when you do product development, it's a bit of a pain, right? Each time you have to design the test that you're doing, you have to go out there, do the A/B test, and you're moving fast. You have this feeling that any change would be a good change, so you might as well just go ahead and push to production. I mean, I have so many times that's actually not true, right? But like, it's hard for a product manager. You have to justify the value, right? Like your performance review cycle is coming up, and if you don't push something to production, right, what did you do?
Yeah, that's what people say about designers sometimes, right? That they need to change the interface because they're all being paid for something.
Yeah, no, and I think having data analytics more accessible, so data is less scary, and also, I mean, in some ways, right, like generative AI will be able to. I don't think it's there yet, but it will be able to help you structure your data or make unstructured data more accessible, right? Because a lot of the testing, right, can create a bit of a data mess.
Yeah, I was consuming some content yesterday, maybe, or recently anyway, that was talking, and I actually can't remember what business it was. I'm going to say that it was Netflix, but this business had a centralized data org, and the person from there was basically saying that one of the really the reasons that they backed that approach is because A, it meant that the quality of the data was better because they were proactively investing in it more, and then B, they weren't necessarily telling people what they wanted to hear or using the data to tell the stories that teams wanted to hear, because often the pattern with teams, even in a really sophisticated organization, was to actually, it was just straightforward confirmation bias, right? They had a narrative they wanted to push, and then they were looking for patterns in the data to confirm that. And that's one of the advantages of doing it centrally, is that often you actually can't do that with the data.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of people who are truly data driven, right? Like it's pretty small. Confirmation bias is all over the place, right? I think a lot of people still want to go with what I would call guts and golf. Like go play golf and then make a decision.
Do you have any? So we're obviously where we are with generative AI and with the AI tools that you have described to help businesses kind of understand themselves a bit better. Do you have a sense of how this is likely to continue to change? What's going to be the kind of the next? I don't know, are there areas and kind of practices that you think are going to open up in the next sort of 5-10 years that we're not yet there with?
Well, so one fundamental change that I see happening, and I have not heard many people talk about this, so this will be, let's see how people react to it. But one of the fundamental changes and differences that generative AI brings is a probabilistic approach to engineering. Now, right, like this is, like we are used to decades and decades now of deterministic engineering, where you put something in and the answer is always the same, right? Like a calculator, 3 + 3 is always 6.
Yep.
It's never anything different, which is great for the vast majority of business applications. But a lot of human interactions, right? A lot of that last touch point is very fuzzy, right? We are not machines. We're fuzzy in how we articulate things and how we understand things. Mm-hmm. And so a probabilistic-based tool like a large language model can bridge that gap. At the same time, right, for engineers and product managers to think about how a probabilistic-based piece of technology in your stack behaves is very important. How do you do quality assurance, right? It's very different where in a deterministic engineering approach, quality assurance is pretty straightforward. But in a probabilistic approach, right, in a large language model world, you now have to think about a very different way to assure quality, right? Like one question or like 10 similar questions lead to 1,000 different possible responses and more. So how do you gotta develop some testing frameworks around that? And I think that's a big fundamental change. And a lot of CTOs are old school, right? A lot of old school meaning like last year.
Hello everybody, it's Adam here. I just wanted to interrupt myself and Lucas to tell you a bit about Gen AI, which is just that we're currently working with the world's best software testing teams on the Gen AI testing problem. So if you're in the process of building or configuring a generative AI tool and you don't know how to test it, or there's a lot of time pressure on this project from your boss, get in touch today via globalapptesting.com and say in the box that you're curious about Gen AI testing. We can get you in touch with the world's best test managers who are working on this problem for tier 1 software companies. Back to the show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have some very specific recommendations for customers now as I'm thinking about like architectures, right? If I design an application that uses LLM as part of the stack, I think there are things you can do. I mean, the first one being that the LLM is not the only part of your architecture, right? Where a lot of times now, it's a new shiny thing. So many people think of it as being the core of everything, right? And being maybe even the only thing, right? We're seeing more and more, now we have the RAG architecture, right? The retrieval augmented generation architecture. We have the fine tuning of specific variables, right? There's more and more coming adjacent to it, but the LLM is still the center, right? It's the big gorilla in the room. I think we will have a more orchestrated architecture where there is going to be specialized LLMs maybe for certain things. There's going to be deterministic technologies, like just old school, good old school technologies for certain things. There will be some checks and balances, like a governor piece in there. And I do think, on the testing side, on the QA side, there will probably be a continuous loop of, let's say a few thousand prompts and a few 100,000 acceptable responses where we continuously check for any kind of change in that behavior.
So some kind of hybrid model between an LLM and more traditional like parameters and things like that.
Exactly. Right. You gotta, when everything right now, the hammer is the coolest tool and everybody wants to look for nails, right? We gotta think of, okay, what is the diversity of tools we have and how can we apply them to the different use cases? Now I'm gonna get in hot waters here. Let's see. So, right, I spent most of my career in predictive forecasting. I have been a passionate chess player from childhood on. You take certain patterns, right, and you predict out what will happen next. What is the next move the opponent is going to make, right? What is the move I'm going to make once the opponent makes that move, right? And what is the probability that this will happen? So, in some ways, right, like that's very similar. Now, if you have large data sets, this is a good book. So I'm holding this up, but then also anyone listening, Everybody Lies, right? It's a really good book that talks about how we sometimes are not even fully aware and not honest with ourselves and with anyone conducting surveys on what we truly believe. I have looked at large data sets all my life, and it's amazing how well you can predict, like even from my own, right? Like I think I'm unique. And then it turns out I bought the same grill that everybody else bought this season. You can tell barbecue season is about around the corner, so a lot is barbecue themed here. My uniqueness is, not quite that unique. I do fit in a group of like 10,000 similar people, right? And we behave in certain patterns. So if you take these patterns, you can create data sets, assuming you did a good job of curating the data set, and then predict out what will happen next. And, in some ways, that's what the large language models are, right? The curation of very large data sets, learning from our behaviors.
Yeah.
I think right then you can actually, sometimes it becomes questionable how valuable your own data even becomes, right? Like, because if you have these pretty deep sets and you can predict out that, a guy of my age living in the area I'm living in, right? Like my demographic, everything, right? Yeah, he's thinking about barbecue right now. Like even without doing any kind of like, if you call me today and ask me, hey, Lucas, what are you thinking about? I would tell you large language models, right? Like how to impact businesses and make them better with data. But I'm also thinking about barbecue grills.
You know what it reminds me of? It just makes me think of and I won't name them, but a few businesses that are bombarding me, and I'm sure it's specifically me, with like marketing because they think that I want a meal kit box or something, and I feel that I end up feeling a bit bullied by that, and it actually makes me less likely to. I go, I'm never going to buy this. I don't want to. You think I'm going to buy it because I'm a man of a certain age with certain professional whatever. And become adversarial to your own data set. I don't know.
Well, Adam, actually, I'm getting a lot of meal kits right now too, which makes me wonder, But then
maybe it's more about who's just got investment recently.
No, it's like I think it's the time of year, right? Like diets failed. We're into March. Like everybody gave up on the January, and now thinking of alternatives to the diet you had in place. So you're thinking meal kits or something. Yeah. I don't know. But then, hey, maybe you get to the point where you start thinking, you know what, maybe I should give it a try.
Maybe you get so exhausted with it that you finally come around to it.
I mean, I'm personally, knowing what I know about data and marketing, right? And I spent just because of the nature of all this, a lot in marketing, right?
Yeah.
I'm so cautious, like wherever I can pay for not seeing ads, like YouTube, I really like it, right? I can pay for not seeing ads.
Yeah,
I like it because I know psychology and I know it gets to me, right? I see the ad 7 times, I'm annoyed by it, but I start thinking about that backpack. I have 6 backpacks. I don't need another backpack.
You live in Boulder. That's why that's why they're trying to get you to buy a backpack.
Yeah, exactly. So this subtle manipulation and thing it's definitely a little frightening. And I want to make sure, like, what can I do to make sure that I'm not all of a sudden thinking that I need to buy something, right? Because most of the time you really don't need to buy something.
Before we wrap things up, I did want to quickly talk to you about the kind of the global growth thing, because on our previous call we spoke about that a little bit, and I'd love to just get your thoughts about it here. We obviously, the title of this podcast, which is such a mouthful, I forget it. It is Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth. So there's a kind of global element to it. When we spoke last, you seemed to imply that you were a bit of a proponent of a domestic first approach to product development. Can you just expand on that a little bit and just explain?
No, and this is more from experience, and like my personal beliefs are, you gotta think about the local markets and whatnot. And I've argued many times that, hey, like I'm German, right? Like you got to think about the German market differently and X, Y, and Z. But every time I put a product recommendation document forward, right, where I push a certain market and I say, okay, we got to think about this market, right, Japan, Germany, India, right, wherever, Like I work mostly with US-based companies.
Yeah.
And the US market for B2B especially, but also B2C, right, is so unified and large in terms of purchasing power that it's very hard for me to argue that, we should take a certain, like, until we proved ourselves in the US market and got good traction here, right, then it doesn't quite make sense to customize yet for overseas markets. That said, right, I think if you were to start off in, like, let's say in China or in India, right, very large markets as well, like, I do think you got to take the approach that works there in that location. But every time, like, I think if you think about, like, Germany, Germany is a good example because it's a decent sized economy, very unique language, right, very unique culture too. If you think about that, like, it has to be for that specific sales and marketing team that you're probably going to talk differently for the product. Like Looker. Looker is a good example. The slogan of Looker out of Santa Cruz, California was analytics everybody loves.
Yeah.
Like a very touchy-feely, the color purple was the theme of the company. And then we were going to go into Germany, and I was like, our central offering is secure data structures, like access controls, like enterprise-grade data modeling. That's our core product. You're going into Germany, you got to talk about that. Like, you got to make it like black and serious, and and the sales and marketing team for that market listened, right? The product team is very much like, look, this resonates with the US, democratized data access, right? Like, very different. Yeah, so I'm now more of the mindset, the US is a really good market to start a product just for the nature of how homogeneous the audience is, right? The language and whatnot. And there's a lot of purchasing power here. And once you land it here, then you can think of other markets.
It's so interesting because I think, and you're right, it is extremely difficult to actually generalize about this because obviously it depends so much on the specifics of the business that is being discussed. But in general, we've spent a little while talking about generative AI. The cost of doing fresh marketing or doing fresh software development for that matter is likely to come down, and therefore, as it comes down as the fact of the market, the amount of adaptive products or products that are changing based on whatever it is, probably markets, but also all kinds of features that would be present in terms of differentiated users in different ways who want slightly different offerings. That the amount of that is likely to go up, and it's going to become easier, and it's going to become a way that is more and more important in terms of how businesses operate. Do you agree with that as a premise, I guess?
No, I think that's a very valid point. Any kind of localization efforts, even from a more cultural perspective, right, is going to be much cheaper. Like, I have done experiments myself with LLMs of like, hey, give me feedback for this given culture, right, for this given setting. It's quite good. Like, it's really hard for, like, if you take a head of sales and send them from the US to Europe, right? Like, it's tough for them. I've seen people really fail because they hear what you're saying about different cultures, but they still have their fundamental beliefs.
The very positive and ebullient atmosphere in the Western US, absolutely. We have one final question for you, which we do ask to every guest, which is basically, who in product would you be most interested in taking for lunch? It can be somebody who you know or somebody who you don't know that you'd like to know. We do ask that it's not, for example, Steve Jobs, not somebody who's a living legend from the past. And what kind of lunch would you like to take them out to? If you can say that as well, maybe it's sushi or burgers or what the kind of lunch that you would like to have with them in your imagined lunch date.
I feel very fortunate that I got to meet a lot of my heroes, which is awesome. I really grateful for that, and within Google, right, just amazing people that I got to hang out with and have lunch with. I just read another book here, Hard Things About Hard Things from Ben Horowitz, and he obviously is a bit of a legend in the PM space as well. So I think I like that book a lot. I would love to have lunch with him someday, and maybe I get to. Let's see, maybe grab some sushi. That would be awesome. Yeah.
The wartime CEO, right? Is that what he talks about in that book? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, exactly. It was a great ride. I really, he kept things to the point, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really great podcast episode, and I hope to speak to you again very soon. Building Globally was brought to you by Global App Testing. To find out more about how best-in-class functional and UX testing can help your product grow, head to globalapptesting.com. If you enjoyed what you just heard, click follow on the platform you're using right now. Building Globally is available anywhere you get your podcasts.